Hi, third graders. We're on Matilda. We are on the second part of the chapter called Miss Honey's Cottage, and we are on page 186. We'll finish this chapter today. It was music, Miss Honey said, and then, as though embarrassed at having revealed such a secret part of herself, she quickly pushed back the gate and walked up the path. Matilda hung back. She was a bit frightened of this place now. It seemed so unreal and remote and fantastic and so totally away from this earth. It was like an illustration in Grimm's or Hans Andersen. It was the house where the poor woodcutter lived with Hansel and Gretel, and where Red Riding Hood's grandmother lived, and it was also the house of the 7 dwarfs and the 3 bears and all the rest of them. It was straight out of a fairy tale. "Come along, my dear," Miss Honey called back, and Matilda followed her up the path. The front door was covered with flaky green paint, and there was no keyhole. Miss Honey simply lifted a latch and pushed the door and went in. Although she was not a very tall woman, she had to stoop low to get through the doorway. Matilda went after her and found herself in what seemed to be a dark, narrow tunnel. "You can come through to the kitchen and help me make the tea," Miss Honey said, and she led the way along the tunnel into the kitchen. That is, if you could call it a kitchen. It was not much bigger than a good-sized clothes cupboard, and there was one small window in the back wall with a sink under the window. But there were no taps over the sink, and against another wall there was a shelf, presumably for preparing food, and there was a single cupboard above the shelf. On the shelf itself there stood a Primus stove, a saucepan, and a half-full bottle of milk. A Primus is a little camping stove that you fill with paraffin and you light it at the top, and then you pump it to get pressure for the flame. "You can get me some water while I light the Primus," Miss Honey said. "The well is out at the back. Take the bucket. Here it is. You'll find a rope in the well. Just hook the bucket on the end of the rope and lower it down, but don't fall in yourself." Matilda, what more bemused than ever now, took the bucket and carried it out into the back garden. The well had a little wooden roof over it and a simple winding device, and there was the rope dangling down into a dark bottomless hole. Matilda pulled up the rope and hooked the handle of the bucket onto the end of it. Then she lowered it until she heard a splash and the rope went slack. She pulled it up again, and lo and behold, there was water in the bucket. "Is this enough?" she asked, carrying it in. "Just about," Miss Honey said. "I don't suppose you've ever done that before." "Never," Matilda said. "It's fun. How do you get enough water for your bath?" "I don't take a bath," Miss Honey said. "I wash standing up. I get a bucket full of water and I heat it on this little stove, and I strip and wash myself all over." "Do you honestly do that?" Matilda said. "Of course I do," Miss Honey said. "Every poor person in England used to wash that way until not so very long ago, and they didn't have a Primus. They had to heat the water over the fire in the hearth." "Are you poor, Miss Honey?" "Yes," Miss Honey said, "very. It's a good little stove, isn't it?" The Primus was roaring away with a powerful blue flame, and already the water in the saucepan was beginning to bubble. Miss Honey got a teapot from the cupboard and put some tea leaves into it. She also found herself a small loaf of brown bread. She cut 2 thin slices, and then from a plastic container she took some margarine and spread it on the butter. Margarine, Matilda thought. She really must be poor. Miss Honey found a tray, and on it she put 2 mugs, the teapot, and a half bottle of milk, and a plate with the 2 slices of bread. "I'm afraid I don't have any sugar," she said. "I never use it." "That's all right," Matilda said. In her wisdom, she seemed to be aware of the delicacy of the situation, and she was taking great care not to say anything to embarrass her companion. "Let's have it in the sitting room," Miss Honey said, picking up the tray and leading the way out of the kitchen. and down the dark little tunnel into the room at the front. Matilda followed her, but just inside the doorway of the so-called sitting room, she stopped and stared around her in absolute amazement. The room was so small and square and bare as a prison cell. The pale daylight that entered came from a single tiny window in the front wall, but there were no curtains. The only objects in the entire room were two upturned wooden boxes to serve as chairs and a third box between them for a table. That was all. There were no pictures on the walls, no carpet on the floor, only rough, unpolished wooden planks, and there were gaps between the planks where dust and bits of grime had gathered. The ceiling was so low that with a jump, Matilda could nearly touch it with her fingertips. The walls were white, but the whiteness didn't look like paint. Matilda rubbed her palm against it, and a white powder came off onto her skin. It was whitewash, the cheap stuff that is used in cowsheds and stables and hen houses. Matilda was appalled. Was this really where her neat and trimly dressed school teacher lived? Was this all she had to come back to after a day's work? It was unbelievable. And what was the reason for it? There was something very strange going on here. Surely Miss Honey put the tray on one of the upturned boxes. "Sit here, my dear, sit here," she said, "and we'll have a nice hot cup of tea. Help yourself to bread. Both slices are for you. I never eat anything when I get home. I have a good old tuck-in at the school lunch, and that keeps me going until the next morning." So all she eats every day is a school lunch. Matilda perched herself carefully on an upturned box, and more out of politeness than anything else, she took a slice of bread and margarine and started to eat it. At home, she would have been having buttered toast and strawberry jam and probably a piece of sponge cake to round it off. And yet this was somehow far more fun. There was a mystery here in this house, a great mystery. There was no doubt about it, and Matilda was longing to find out what it was. I want you to make a prediction right now. Miss Honey poured the tea and added a little milk to both cups. She appeared to be not in the least ill at ease, sitting on an upturned box in a bare room and drinking tea out of a mug that she balanced on her knee. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking very hard about what you did with that glass. It is a great power you have been given, my child. You know that." "Yes, Miss Honey, I do," Matilda said, chewing her bread and margarine. "So far as I know," Miss Honey went on, "nobody else in the history of the world has been able to compel an object to move without touching it or blowing on it or using any outside help at all." Matilda nodded, but said nothing. "The fascinating thing," Miss Honey said, "would be to find out the real limit of this power of yours. Oh, I know you think you can move just about anything there is, but I have my doubts about it." "I'd love to try something really huge," Matilda said. "What about distance?" Miss Honey asked. "Would you always have to be close to the thing you were pushing?" "I simply do not know," Matilda said, "but it would be fun to find out." We're going to stop right there at the end of this chapter. Have a good day.